They called them barbarians, men without cities, without discipline, without order. To Rome they were shadows beyond the frontier, useful as auxiliaries, dangerous only when disorganized, and ultimately destined to kneel before the eagle. Rome had crushed kings, erased republics, and bent continents to its will. From the burning sands of Africa to the cold mountains of Hispania, its legions marched as an unstoppable force. Wherever Roman boots touched the earth, roads followed, laws followed, taxes followed. And resistance ended, or so Rome believed. In the 9th year after Christ, 3 Roman legions vanished, not defeated, not routed, erased, no triumph, no survivors' parade, no heroic last stand sung by poets, just silence broken only by screams echoing through a dark forest in the heart of Germania. This was not a battle Rome expected. This was not a war Rome prepared for. This was the day Rome learned that its power had limits. At the height of its dominance, the Roman Empire stood unrivaled under the rule of Augustus. Civil wars were over. The Republic was dead. In its place rose an empire that claimed the favor of the gods themselves. Augustus had brought Pax Romana, Roman peace, through iron, blood, and absolute authority, and peace Rome believed had reached Germania. Beyond the Rhine lived tribes Rome barely understood. The Cherusci, the Bructeri, the Marsi, names written in reports, reduced to numbers and tribute. To the Senate, Germania was no longer a hostile frontier. It was an unfinished province awaiting organization. So Rome did what Rome always did. It sent an administrator. His name was Publius Quinctilius Varus. Varus was not a legendary commander. He was not forged in desperate wars or hardened by defeat. He was a governor, a man of law and order, trusted by Augustus to bring Roman civilization to places where swords had already cleared the way. At least that's what Varus believed. He marched east with 3 legions, XVII, XVII, and XIX, supported by auxiliaries and camp followers. Nearly 20,000 men, veterans, engineers, officers trained in the most disciplined army the world had ever known. They did not march as an army entering enemy territory. They marched as rulers inspecting subjects. Roman standards rose above the trees. Eagles glinted in the daylight. Drums echoed through valleys that had never heard them before. Villages were catalogued, taxes were imposed, Roman justice was enforced without mercy. To Varus, resistance was unthinkable, because Rome had an ally, a man who spoke Latin, a man who wore Roman armor, a man who saluted the eagle and swore loyalty to the emperor. His name was Arminius. To the Romans, Arminius was proof that Germania was already conquered. A tribal noble raised in Roman ways, trained in Roman warfare, granted Roman citizenship. He rode beside Varus not as a captive, but as a trusted commander of auxiliary forces. He warned Varus of unrest, he spoke of rebellion, and he offered guidance. Varus listened, because Rome trusted those who looked Roman, spoke Roman, and served Roman interests. What Varus did not see, what Rome could not imagine, was that the forest itself was watching. Germania was not open plains like Gaul. Not deserts like Africa, not roads and cities that bent to Roman order. It was dark, wet, endless. The trees swallowed sound. The ground turned roads into traps. Rain turned discipline into chaos. And somewhere beyond the marching columns, men moved unseen, men who had waited years for this moment. Rome believed the war was over, but for the barbarians it had only just begun. And as the legions advanced deeper into the forest, following the guidance of the man they trusted most, the path behind them quietly disappeared. The road vanished first, not suddenly, not dramatically. It simply stopped being a road. Stone gave way to mud. The clean geometry of Roman engineering dissolved into winding paths beaten down by animals and rain. The forest closed in from every direction, oak, beech and pine towering like walls, their canopies blotting out the sky. Rain began to fall. Not a storm at first, just enough to soak cloaks, to darken leather, to turn dust into sludge. The march slowed, wagons creaked, mules stumbled, armor grew heavier with every step. Still no alarm was sounded. This was Germania, wild, unpleasant, but conquered. At the center of the column rode Publius Quinctilius Varus, calm and unhurried. Reports of rebellion had reached him, yes, but rebellions were common, small, disorganized. The kind Rome crushed without breaking stride. He trusted his guides, he trusted his officers. Most of all, he trusted Arminius. Arminius rode ahead, speaking of unrest deeper in the territory. He urged speed, warning that delay might embolden the tribes. His voice was measured, respectful, Roman, so Varus ordered the column forward. The legions stretched thin. This was not how Roman armies preferred to move. On open ground, legions marched in compact formations, orderly, lethal, precise. But the forest made discipline impossible. Trees forced the column into a long, broken line. Cohorts lost sight of one another. Commands echoed and vanished among the trunks. Rain intensified. Shields slick with water slipped in tired hands. Bowstrings loosened. The ground sucked at sandals and boots alike. Every step became an effort. Then came the first sound, a sharp crack, wood striking wood. A javelin burst from the trees and slammed into a Roman shield. Another struck a mule, sending it screaming into the mud. Shouts rang out as men scrambled for formation. Varus ordered a halt. Auxiliaries moved forward, peering into the forest. They saw nothing, just trees, just rain. Then another volley fell. This time men screamed. Javelins and spears rained from the darkness, hurled from hidden embankments, from behind trees, from ground higher than the road itself. The Romans raised shields, forming what protection they could, but the formation was broken, uneven, incomplete, and still they could not see their enemy. The forest swallowed them. Roman horns sounded, calling units together. Officers shouted orders that could not be heard. The disciplined rhythm of the march collapsed into confusion as soldiers pushed and slipped, struggling to form lines where no space existed. Then the barbarians attacked. They did not charge, they did not shout, they struck and vanished. Germanic warriors burst from the trees in small groups, hacking at the edges of the column, dragging men into the undergrowth, then melting back into the forest before Roman steel could answer. This was not battle as Rome understood it. There was no front line, no clear enemy, no decisive clash, only fear. Rain poured now, relentless and cold. The road became a river of mud, choked with fallen men, broken carts, and dying animals. Legionaries tried to advance, then retreat, then advance again, each movement slower than the last. Varus ordered a fortified camp built. It was the Roman answer to chaos. Wherever the legions stopped, they built ditches, ramparts, order imposed on disorder. But the forest fought back, trees limited space, mud slowed digging. Darkness fell quickly beneath the canopy, and all around them, just beyond the flicker of torchlight, eyes watched. That night the screams began. Not from inside the camp, but from the darkness beyond it. Roman sentries stood rigid as shadows moved just out of sight. Occasionally a javelin would fly, killing a man before vanishing into the rain-soaked earth. Sleep was impossible. Fear spread faster than any enemy blade. By morning the dead were piled at the camp's edge. Wounded men groaned untreated. Supplies were already running low, many wagons lost, abandoned, or destroyed during the march. Varus called a council. Some officers urged retreat. Back toward the Rhine, back to open ground. Others insisted the worst was over, that the attacks were nothing more than harassment by scattered tribes. Arminius was not there. He had left the camp before dawn, claiming he would rally allied forces and return. He never did. As the truth began to dawn, the column moved again, this time not as conquerors but as hunted men. The attacks intensified. Germanic warriors struck from higher ground, rolling boulders down slopes, collapsing trees across the path. Every obstacle forced the Romans to stop, to break formation, to expose themselves. Legionaries died with their shields on their backs, unable to raise them in the cramped terrain. Officers were targeted first, cut down to shatter command. Standards fell, dragged into the mud. The rain did not stop. For 3 days the forest bled Rome dry. By the 3rd day discipline was gone. Men fought in small groups, then alone. The proud legions that had conquered the world were reduced to desperate survivors, starving, exhausted, surrounded. Varus saw what was coming. There would be no escape, no relief, no victory. Rather than be captured, he fell on his sword. Around him, Roman resistance collapsed. The forest claimed the rest. When it was over, 3 legions were gone, their numbers erased from Roman records, their eagles captured, their bones left to rot beneath the trees. Germania was not conquered. It never would be. By the 3rd day, the legions no longer marched. They fled. What had once been the most disciplined military force on earth was now a broken mass of starving, wounded men stumbling through mud and corpses. Armor was discarded to lighten loads. Shields were abandoned. Standards once carried with sacred reverence lay face down in the filth. The forest pressed closer with every step. Rain fell without mercy. It soaked cloaks, rusted blades, and turned wounds black with infection. Men had not eaten properly in days. Horses collapsed where they stood, screaming as they were cut free from tangled harnesses or butchered where they fell. There was no order left to maintain, only survival. The Romans could hear their enemies now. Not battle cries, not horns, laughter. From the trees came mocking shouts in a dozen tribal tongues. Germanic warriors no longer struck only from the shadows. They let themselves be seen. Faces painted, hair bound, spears raised in open challenge. They knew the end was near. Every Roman movement was watched, every hesitation punished. When the column slowed, attacks came. When it stopped, death followed. The forest floor was slick with blood. Bodies lay everywhere, legionaries crushed by falling trees, pierced by spears, dragged screaming into the undergrowth. Some were found later nailed to trees, sacrificed to gods Rome did not understand. Others were never found at all. At one point, the survivors reached a narrow clearing, a brief, cruel promise of space. Officers tried to reform the men, to create something resembling a line. Shields were raised, swords drawn. For a moment, Rome stood again. Then the trap closed. From the ridges surrounding the clearing, Germanic warriors surged forward, not in disorder, but in waves. They had learned Rome's methods. They struck the flanks first, then the rear, isolating pockets of resistance and destroying them one by one. The Romans fought desperately. Veterans formed shield walls around wounded comrades. Centurions bellowed orders until their voices gave out or until spears found their throats. Eagles were raised again, bloodied but defiant. One by one they fell. When the final standard went down, something broke in the Roman soul. Men threw down their weapons. Some begged. Others ran only to be hunted down like animals. The forest echoed with screams, prayers, and curses hurled at gods that did not answer. At the center of the chaos, Varus understood there would be no rescue, no retreat. No forgiveness. Rome would never allow a captured governor to live, and the barbarians would not spare him, so he chose death. Surrounded by the ruins of his command, Varus fell upon his sword. His officers followed. An entire leadership died not in glory but in despair. Resistance collapsed completely. The slaughter that followed was not a battle, it was an execution. Germanic warriors moved methodically through the remnants of the legions. The wounded were finished off, prisoners were bound. Some were spared not out of mercy but for sacrifice. By nightfall, the forest was silent, not because there were no Romans left, but because none were alive to scream. The bodies were left where they fell, armor stripped, weapons claimed. The eagles, the sacred symbols of Roman power, were paraded before the tribes as trophies beyond price. 3 legions had entered Germania. None returned. Days later, scavengers came, wolves, birds. Rain washed blood into the soil. Bones sank beneath leaves and mud. The forest reclaimed what Rome had lost. Years would pass before Roman soldiers dared to walk those paths again. When they did, they found skulls nailed to trees, bleached bones stacked like warnings, altars built from Roman armor. It was not just a battlefield, it was a message. Rome hears the news. The messenger's journey took weeks. Each mile carried dread heavier than armor. Each step closer to the heart of the empire made the truth harder to speak. When the report finally reached Rome, disbelief came first. 3 legions gone, auxiliaries destroyed, no survivors. It was impossible. Rome did not lose legions. It punished them, replaced them, renamed them. But these numbers, XVII, XVII, XIX, would never be used again. When the emperor heard the truth, the palace fell silent. Augustus, master of the world, was said to wander his halls in grief, striking his head against the walls, crying out for the return of the dead. "Give me back my legions." The words echoed through Rome like a curse. The Senate panicked. The people feared invasion. If barbarians could destroy 3 legions, what stopped them from crossing the Rhine, from marching on Gaul, on Italy itself? Emergency measures were taken, defenses strengthened, recruitment accelerated, veterans recalled, but something deeper had changed. Rome no longer looked east with confidence, it looked with fear. Before the forest, Rome expanded without hesitation. After it, Rome built walls. The Rhine became a boundary, not a highway. Germania was no longer an unfinished province, it was a warning. Expeditions were launched later, yes, revenge was taken, eagles were recovered, but the dream of conquest died beneath the trees. The empire had learned a lesson written in blood. Discipline means nothing without intelligence. Power means nothing without respect. And no empire, no matter how mighty, is invincible. In the depths of a forgotten forest, Rome was humbled, not by another empire, but by men it believed were beneath it. Rome did not answer humiliation with silence, it answered with steel. In the years that followed the catastrophe, the empire tightened its grip on the frontier. New legions were raised, veterans were recalled, forts multiplied along the Rhine like scars on the land. Watchtowers rose where roads once would have gone, but Rome did not advance, it waited. Fear does strange things to empires. It sharpens the blade, but it also teaches caution. And Rome had learned at terrible cost that Germania was not a land to be absorbed quietly into an imperial ledger. Still, vengeance could not be denied. Several years after the disaster, Roman banners moved again into the forests. This time they did not march blindly. They scouted, they fortified every camp. They advanced slowly, deliberately, as if the land itself might strike back. They were led by a man very different from Varus, a commander shaped by discipline and patience. A general who understood both Roman warfare and the enemy Rome now faced. He did not believe the forest could be conquered, but he believed it could be punished. The legions returned to the killing ground. What they found haunted even hardened soldiers. Bones lay scattered beneath the trees, picked clean, bleached by time and rain. Helmets split open, shields rotted into the earth, skulls nailed to trunks, some still bearing the marks of execution. Altars stood among the remains, Roman altars. Built by enemy hands, veterans recognized comrades by armor fragments, by belt buckles, by the bones of hands that once held shields beside them. Many wept, others swore oaths they would not survive to break. The legions buried what they could, they burned what they could not, and then they hunted. Villages suspected of involvement were destroyed, crops burned, warriors were hunted through marsh and forest alike. Battles were fought on Roman terms now, on open ground, with cavalry, with discipline restored. The barbarians bled, but they did not break. For every village destroyed, another vanished deeper into the wilds. For every warrior killed, others took his place. Germania did not offer a capital to seize, a king to parade, or a senate to dissolve. It offered only resistance. Rome recovered some of what it had lost. Two of the sacred eagles were eventually reclaimed, dragged back across the Rhine in solemn processions meant to heal a wounded pride, but one eagle was never found. It remained lost in the forest, a reminder that Rome's reach had failed. The legions withdrew again, not in defeat, but not in victory either. Rome had punished the tribes. It had shown that blood would be answered with blood, but it had also confirmed what the forest had already proven. Germania could not be ruled, not without endless war, and Rome, for the first time in generations, chose restraint. The shadow over the empire, the disaster, changed more than borders. It changed Rome itself. From that moment on, the empire became defensive. Expansion slowed, fortification replaced ambition. Walls rose where legions once marched freely, along the Rhine, the Danube, and eventually across Britain itself. The empire turned inward. Commanders studied the catastrophe obsessively. Manuals were rewritten. Intelligence networks expanded. Scouts were valued as much as swords. Never again would a Roman army march blind into hostile land. Never again, so they believed. Yet the fear never fully faded. Every rumor from the frontier carried echoes of the forest. Every rebellion, every missing patrol, every ambush revived memories of legends screaming in the rain, and the name of the traitor lived on. Arminius. To his people he was a liberator, a unifier, a man who had outwitted the greatest empire on earth and lived. To Rome he was something far worse. He was proof that Rome could be understood and defeated by those it tried to dominate. Years later, Arminius would die not at Roman hands, but by the politics of his own people. Betrayed, murdered, consumed by the same rivalries he had once overcome, but his victory outlived him. The Rhine remained a boundary for centuries. Germania developed beyond Rome's direct control. Cultures, languages, and identities survived that would otherwise have been absorbed, erased, or Romanized. And far in the future, long after Rome itself had fallen, those differences would shape the map of Europe. All because of a forest, all because of a single march that should never have happened. A warning written in blood. Empires tell themselves stories. They tell stories of destiny, of superiority, of inevitability. Rome believed its victories were proof of divine favor, that discipline and order would always triumph over chaos and resistance. But the forest cared nothing for destiny. It rewarded patience. It rewarded unity. It rewarded those who knew the land better than the enemy who sought to claim it. Rome was not defeated by ignorance. It was defeated by arrogance. And though the empire would endure for centuries more, its illusion of invincibility died among the trees, where 3 legions marched in confidence and never came home. Long after the bodies had turned to bone, the forest remained. Trees grew where men had fallen, roots twisted through rusted armor. Rain washed away blood, but not memory. The land itself remembered what Rome wished to forget. For the Roman Empire, the disaster was never just a military defeat. It was a wound to identity. Rome had believed itself unstoppable, not because it always won, but because it believed it should win. Its armies were the embodiment of order imposed on chaos. Its victories were proof that history itself bent toward Roman rule. But the forest had refused. No city was taken. No king surrendered. No treaty was signed. Rome did not lose to another empire. It lost to terrain, patience, and a people who understood that survival sometimes meant waiting, sometimes meant deception, sometimes meant letting the enemy destroy itself. In the years that followed, Roman writers struggled to explain what had happened. Some blamed Varus, others blamed fate. A few dared to suggest something more dangerous, that Rome's enemies were not mindless barbarians, but thinking, adapting, learning men. That idea frightened Rome more than any spear. Because if the barbarians could learn Roman ways, they could defeat Roman power again, and they would. Centuries later, different forests would see similar scenes. Roman columns ambushed, borders tested, legions stretched thin. The empire would survive many crises, but never again with the same certainty it once had. The illusion had shattered. The Rhine remained a frontier not because Rome lacked strength, but because it had gained wisdom through fear. Germania was left beyond the imperial grasp, free to develop along its own path. Languages endured, identities survived, futures diverged, history itself bent at that moment. What happened in that forest shaped the world that followed, the map of Europe, the cultures that rose after Rome's fall, the idea that even the greatest power on earth could be stopped, not by matching its strength, but by understanding its weaknesses. And that lesson has never grown old. Empires still rise believing themselves invincible. Armies still march convinced technology and numbers will carry the day. Leaders still mistake control for understanding, but somewhere in every age there is always a forest, a place where confidence becomes vulnerability, where certainty becomes blindness, where power walks in and never walks out. Rome learned that lesson the hard way. And the echo of that defeat still whispers through history, through every warning ignored, every enemy underestimated, every march begun with arrogance instead of respect, because no empire is eternal, and no power is immune to its own mistakes. If you enjoyed this story and want more cinematic deep dives into history's most brutal and decisive moments, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Leave a comment below and tell us what battle should we cover next, and where in the world are you watching from. Until next time, remember, history doesn't just tell us what happened, it warns us.